Every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. I don't think Betty even knows how spot on that song is, according to our message this morning from Psalm 145. But I'm pleased to announce today that we have stepped up to the challenge as a church. Last week I issued a challenge, and I'm glad to report that some have stepped up. I'm referring, of course, to our yellow handout. Did you each get a new one this week when you came in? Okay, when you came in, you're to be handed a new yellow handout. We're now into sermon number 3 of an 8-week series on the topic of the Psalms. The Psalms are a set of poetry in the Bible. Originally, they were written as songs, but we don't know what the music was like. All the music is lost and forgotten. But the songs, that poetry, it's not all the same. You would think if Scripture is inspired by God, that He would only allow in psalms that were all flowery, full of trust and full of hope and full of faith. You might imagine that the psalms would be content which paints a glowing picture of life that you might even hardly recognize it in the day-to-day reality mix of joys and sorrows, ups and downs, celebrations and disappointments. But you'd think that God would want to control the message and use the poetry section of the Bible to hide the hardships of life, sell the idea of faith with bright and glowing words of steadfast trust. But the Psalms they're no PR stunt. They're about as honest as you can get. They recognize that people are a mixed bag of emotions, fluctuating from peak to valley as they navigate their way in a world that offers both joy and sorrow. The Psalms do not sugarcoat life. They allow for people to cry out in all honesty to God, regardless of the circumstance. But they do also elevate us beyond our nearsightedness, reminding us that God created the world. He is in control. He's been there in the past, and we can trust Him with our tomorrows. The Psalms does all that for us. The yellow reference sheet that I've handed out, it's a recipe book for you to navigate the Psalms. By spending time in the Psalms over the course of a few weeks, my hope is that you will all begin to reach for them more often than you do now. It might become an automatic reaction that you can reach for the Psalms, whatever you're going through. If you've had a great day and your heart is full of pride and joy and contentment, then your hand might automatically reach to the bookshelf for your Bible and find a psalm to express your wonder at all that God has blessed you with. Or if maybe you're going through a trauma, a bleak and dark, or even just a disappointing time, then your hand would also reach for that very same bookshelf in that very same part of the Bible and find a psalm that expresses your distress. Or perhaps you just come through some kind of trial or anxiety or uncertainty and things worked out as well as you could expect them to, or maybe even better than you'd hoped, and your heart is happy and hopeful. Well, maybe your hand would find that same familiar path to that same old bookshelf and turn to those same pages of the Psalms, now well worn from use, and you would find a note of praise that echoes your gratitude and testimony of God's goodness. Well, your yellow sheet, I'm hoping, will serve as a guide so that you can find a psalm that reflects today's cry of your heart. You look at the categories, you look at the list of psalms, and you'll be surprised at how well they articulate your intended prayers. But I didn't want to make it too easy for you, right? So I asked you to do some of the homework to fill out our yellow sheet of paper. I challenged you all to read some psalms on your own and then email me and let me know which category you think that psalm belongs in. And then what did I promise you? If you did that homework, I'd go ahead and I'd edit the yellow piece of paper and I'd add your psalm into the category you thought it belonged to. Well, I actually had 4 people. 4 people out of our church read some Psalms and emailed me this past week, and got out of those 4 people about a dozen new Psalms for our yellow piece of paper. And therefore, I've printed off a new sheet. It's called version 2.0. And I'm hoping for version 3.0 next week, after you have all done some more homework. We now have listed a total of 45 Psalms on our reference page. That means we only have 105 to go. That's not too many, is it? That's not too much homework for us. If each one of you reads one Psalm and sends me your thoughts by email, we could have all 50 listed on our page by next Sunday. My inbox and my email will be pretty full, but I'm willing to endure that. So, in alphabetical order, here are your names in the Psalm I want you to look up for me this week. No, I'm not going to do it that way. But again, the challenge is there for you. If you do this work, I will add your thoughts to our page. I only have 2 requests. One is that you please email me by Friday so that I have time to edit the document and print it off. And also check this list and make sure the Psalm isn't already here. Okay? Read one that's not yet on the page and send me your thoughts on it. So now let's look at Psalm 145, one we're going to look at today. It's a full 21 verses. It's not one of the longer Psalms, but it's longer than some of the short ones. But I want to read it in its entirety for you. So if you have a Bible with you, please turn with me. You can use the Pew Bible that's provided for you if you want, or you may just listen along and just hear it that way. Psalm 145. I tend to use the English Standard Version Bible. I'm not sure which translation you like, but that's the one I've been using. So if the wording doesn't match exactly, that's okay. Psalm 145. I will extol you, my God and King, and bless your name forever and ever. Every day I will bless you and praise your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. One generation shall commend your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts. On the glorious splendor of your majesty and on your wondrous works I will meditate. They shall speak of the might of your awesome deeds, and I will declare your greatness. They shall pour forth the fame of your abundant goodness and shall sing aloud of your righteousness. The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. The Lord is good to all, and his mercy is over all that he has made. All your works shall give thanks to you, O Lord, and all your saints shall bless you. They shall speak of the glory of your kingdom and tell of your power, to make known to the children of man your mighty deeds and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures throughout all generations. The Lord is faithful in all his words and kind in all his works. The Lord upholds all who are falling and rises up all who are bowed down. The eyes of all look to you, and you give them their food in due season. You open your hand, you satisfy the desire of every living thing. The Lord is righteous in all his ways and kind in all his works. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. He fulfills the desire of those who fear him. He also hears their cry and saves them. The Lord preserves all who love him, but all the wicked he will destroy. My mouth will speak the praise of the Lord, and let all flesh bless his holy name forever and ever. So where do you think this psalm fits on our reference sheet? Is it a psalm of is it a song or a prayer of someone who's going through a distressful time? Is it a prayer of someone who has just been through a real time of distress and is echoing that things are a lot better now? Or is it a psalm of things are going well? It's life is as it should be. Which category do you think it fits in? Psalm of orientation, disorientation, or reorientation? It's a psalm of orientation, isn't it? And the author uses this sweeping imagery, flowery language, and grand statements about God and the world that we are in. There's no hint of distress or in the immediate experience of the author. There's no hint that the author has just experienced some harrowing incident. The psalm expresses what is normally true and supposed to be true in the world the way God has created it and intended it to be. Now, if we want to be a little bit more particular about it, we could talk about what kind of orientation psalm it is. This is not a psalm of Torah. What's the word Torah mean? What are we talking about? It's God's law, right? Torah is the Old Testament law. Torah is the 10 commandments of Moses and all the other laws that he brought down to the people of God in the Old Testament. And there are psalms that extol the virtues of the righteousness of God's commands, and they affirm the efficacy of those rules. In other words, there are psalms which simply state, remember the rules of God because they're good and because they work. Which psalm is the longest one out of all the 150? Do you remember? Do you know the number of it? 119. Psalm 119 is the longest. And the reason it's the longest is because it's laid out in this way. Every stanza in that poem, so every paragraph in that psalm, has its first word beginning with another letter in the Hebrew alphabet. That's how it's structured. So the first word of the first paragraph begins with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The first word in the second paragraph begins with the second letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And the third and the fourth and so on, covers all of the letters in the alphabet. And so the poem is structured that way, and it talks about the rules of God and how they are worth keeping. It's a Torah psalm. Immersed in the Hebrew language and structured as an alphabet poem, the longest psalm highlights God's law, and we categorize it as a Torah psalm. There are also wisdom psalms, like the one we talked about last week, where the point is rooted in the understanding that God rewards the just and punishes the wicked. Therefore, live your life the right way and don't go down the wrong path. Psalms of wisdom. And there are psalms of well-being, where the author is largely talking about themselves and their experiences in life. But Psalm 145 that we just read does not talk about the particulars of God's law. It does not put the spotlight on the author themselves, nor does it extol the virtues of choosing the right path in life. Rather, the author shines the spotlight here directly on God, right? That's what the whole psalm is about. It's about God. And we call it a psalm of creation because this is God in the world as he made and designed it when things are working the way they should be. These things are true. And the author so thoroughly enjoys that environment that he was inspired to write this psalm. Now, poetry is not at its best when you pick it apart and microanalyze the pieces. That's not really what poetry is intended for. Poetry is written as a whole poem to be read from start to finish, all at once, in its entirety. Poetry conjures up images, it creates word pictures, it inspires the imagination, and aims its communication directly at the heart and not really at the mind. With lofty words and grand statements, poetry wants you to feel what the author is feeling rather than know what the author is saying. But still this morning, at the risk of treating poetry unfairly, I want to highlight a few parts of this one to show you some things to notice when you're reading these kinds of psalms, okay? What you should notice in the poetry. The first thing to notice is that the author is willing to speak not only for themselves, but on behalf of other people. Now, that's not always as bad as you might think it would turn out. Lisa and I, we connected with a couple named Ken and Rebecca back in our seminary days. We got along really well with them. We spent all kinds of time with this couple. They were in the same boat as we were, living at a distance away from family while attending school and making that investment. So we had not only quality time together, but we had quantity time together. And that's, I think, how friendships are made. So in fact, Lisa ended up in their wedding party. Anyway, things changed once we graduated. Ken became the pastor of a church right there in Regina, where our seminary was. But Lisa and I, once I graduated, we moved up to Prince Albert, which was 4 hours north. So suddenly, we had a lot less time together with these friends. And we only got to visit on occasion. Something like 2 years later, we met up with them in Regina and went to one of our favorite places together. We went to Swiss Chalet. And Ken said, "Daniel, I'm going to order for you." Now, Ken has a slightly mischievous side, and I was a little bit hesitant because I'm a bit of a creature of habit. I like what I like, I know what I like, and why bother messing with a system that works? That's kind of my philosophy and attitude. Ken is far more adventurous, and I wondered what new thing had been added to the Swiss Chalet menu that he's going to order for me. So the waitress comes over, everybody orders. And Ken points at me, and he said he will have quarter chicken, white meat with fries, and an extra sauce. And he was spot on. We had only gone to the Swiss a couple times together, and all this time, 2 years later, he remembered what to order for me, right down to the extra sauce up front, because I know I'm going to need it. Sometimes it's okay to have other people speak for you when they're certain of what you would normally say. If you read through Psalm 145, you'll notice that the author speaks for three different groups. The author speaks sometimes for himself. The author speaks sometimes for the faithful people of God. And the author speaks sometimes for all people. Let me just give you a few quick examples. You can always look later at the psalm in its entirety when you get home and think these things through. But look at this. Look at the way it opens up. Verse 1. I will extol you, my God and King, and bless your name forever and ever. Every day I will bless you and praise your name. Okay? Who's he speaking for? Just and only himself. How about look at verse 10? Look at verse 10. All your works shall give thanks to you, O Lord, and all your saints shall bless you. Who is he now speaking for? Is it just himself? No. It's a whole group of people. What kind of a group of people? It's people who believe. It's the faithful, the already convinced in God's goodness. That's who he's speaking for. How about verse 21? My mouth will speak. Okay, starts off with my. But then, let who at the end? What's it actually say? Let all flesh bless his holy name forever and ever. Look at verse 15. The eyes of all look to you. Suddenly, who's he speaking for? everyone. Okay? Very free to speak for himself and also to speak for the body of the faithful, and then also to speak on behalf of all people, all living things, all flesh. Now, this is interesting because if you look at the history of God's people and if you look at the history of the church, you'll see a history full of disagreement, right? In my own lifetime, I have seen the church, capital C church, right? The Christian church in the world. I have seen the church in disagreement about several things. The church has disagreed about methods of evangelism. The church has disagreed about the size and style of its buildings. The church has disagreed about the legitimacy of shrinking congregations and about the effectiveness of church plants. The church has disagreed on teaching and worship styles. The church has disagreed on appropriate clothing. And the church has disagreed on methods of caring for the poor and needy. There's no shortage of disagreements among the saints if you care to look for it. But here's the point. The author is talking about things that the saints of God would agree to if they were healthy and of sound mind, right? If they're healthy and of sound mind, they're going to agree to these things. He's not diving into the details of contextualized ministry where one thing that maybe works in Ontario, Canada, and something else works in Nairobi, Kenya. The two styles of church will be very different on multiple levels, but neither one is wrong. The author of the Psalms doesn't dive into those kinds of issues, but the words he does put in their mouths, we would have no problem saying, regardless of what place you are from or what period of time you lived in. All your saints shall bless you. They shall speak of the glory of your kingdom and tell of your power. All the saints will do that. And we can all say amen to that. If you're a faithful member of God's family in whatever iteration of the church or the Hebrew nation, then this is a statement that someone else can legitimately make for you because you will bless the Lord and you will speak of the glory of his kingdom and you will tell of his power. It is true of you, even if someone else is saying it. Even if the author of the Psalms is saying it, he is echoing words that could and would come out of your mouth. But that's an easy bet, to speak for the saints on lofty words of grandeur about who God is, right? A little bit more difficult is for the author to speak on behalf of all people, which he freely does. One generation shall commend your works to another. Maybe he's referring to the day when Christ will return and all things will be revealed. Maybe he's looking forward to a future that has not come yet, but when it does, all the world will be in full agreement, finally recognizing God for who he is, even though they will not recognize him now. You can make that argument that he's referring to a future reality because in many of these statements, future tense is used. But there's a pattern in these kinds of psalms that make it sound like more than just future wishful thinking. The sentiment is more than just a hopefulness of what may be someday, and is far more a sense of he understands this is the way things operate now. It's a statement of what should be when the world is working properly, rather than a statement of accurately representing what people say now. I understand that's a little bit technical, so let me put it in these terms. Let's say the Montreal Canadiens come and they play the Leafs in Toronto. And the commentator says, the Leafs move the puck up the middle. They take the Canadian zone with a pass over to the wing, pass across the crease, a commotion in front of the net, and the Leafs score. And then he follows it up with, and the crowd goes wild. Now, why does he say that? Why does he say the crowd goes wild? The crowd is a lot of people. Not everyone in the Air Canada Centre, when the Montreal Canadiens are playing the Toronto Maple Leafs, is actually a fan of the Leafs. And they're not always happy that the Leafs just got a goal. It's quite conceivable that one or maybe two people drove all the way from Quebec to watch the Canadiens play the Leafs, right? And so when the Leafs score, the whole entirety of the crowd, in fact, does not go wild. The commentator just put words in the mouth of someone who does not believe in the words, yet nobody takes him to task for it, right? He makes no apology for leaving out the Canadiens fans when he says, and the crowd goes wild. So why is it permissible? It's permissible because the speaker is caught up in the elation of the moment. There's a good vibe. There's a feeling that all is well. The speaker senses it himself. The speaker sees and hears and knows of many affirming voices, and then the speaker takes license to attribute that very same sentiment to the whole crowd in the arena. The author of Psalm 145 does the exact same thing. It's not really an affirmation of what all people will or will not say today or tomorrow or maybe ever. Rather, it's a comment on how strongly the author feels about the truths he is saying. So as you read through the Psalms, look for and notice when the author switches up between first person singular, talking about his own opinions that he himself holds, and speaks from that perspective of I and me. And watch for when the author switches up then and begins to speak on behalf of all the saints and all the believers. Or extrapolates even further and alludes to the voices of all people. It speaks to the depth of conviction of the author. The bigger the audience he quotes from, the more excited he is about his statements. And the author of Psalm 145 is, in fact, pretty excited about his subject because his subject is God. And this brings me to the second piece to notice when you're reading through Psalms of creation like this. The author talks about two aspects of God, his character and his works. So, you all have Psalm 145 open in front of you. Tell me some of the mentions of God's character. Not his works, but God's character. Just say them out loud. Okay, what's it say? The glorious wonder of your majesty. That's the character piece. What else? Great is the Lord. What else? Okay. Okay, the Lord reigns. Yeah. Abundant goodness. It's the character of God is all through there, right? Yeah. Goodness, steadfastness, love, generosity, fairness. You get this sense as you read through this psalm that the author is frantically reaching for more and better adjectives and descriptors to express his feelings about God. We don't know why the author is having a good day. We don't know why he's so enamored with God in that moment. But you can't help when you read through Psalm 145 but to notice the lofty language he uses about God. So good and precious and helpful are his words and sentiments that we reuse them. We reuse those words. We built them into worship songs around the content of these creation psalms. Sometimes our songs quote the Psalms verbatim, right? But what I'd like to see is our church not waiting until Sunday morning and accidentally get content from the Psalms in a random worship chorus. A better practice is to be self-aware and notice the temperature of your relationship with God. And when it's high and full of appreciation for him, grab your Bible, grab the yellow reference page, look up a psalm of creation, and let it echo the sentiments of your heart. And allow yourself to agree with the author as he describes the majestic character of God. You'll also notice the author talks about the works of God. How does he do that in the psalm? Same thing. Quote me a couple of statements in there. The works. How does he reference the works of God? Okay, it's wonderful works. Your mighty acts. All your works praise you. As you go through, it's not just about God's character, it's also about God's works. It's about his track record. There's going to be people who then read through a psalm like this, and they will be in disagreement, and they will argue that God did or did not do these great and wonderful things. Some people read the Psalms, and it does not reflect what they believe and the thoughts of their hearts in that day. But that's a topic for another time, and there are Psalms to address that. And next Sunday and the one after, we're going to talk about those Psalms of disorientation that reflect those sentiments. The author here, in a heightened state of appreciation for God and his kingdom, is simply listing out some of the evidence he's noticed to justify his remarks about who God is. And so there we have it. At the risk of analyzing poetry, there's a couple things for us to notice. When you're reading these Psalms of orientation, the Psalms of creation, notice when the author transitions between I and we the saints, or all the people in all the world, because it's evidence of the sincerity of his expression. And also notice when the author will talk about not only God's character, but also God's work. And notice what he's saying about those things. And depending on what you've been through in life, and especially if you've been suffering and walking through a dark time, you may read a psalm like this and actually become discouraged. You may find that these words, lofty truths, actually ring hollow, and the promises are empty, and the statements are different than your own experience. As a psalm like this can lift you up out of the pits, but it may sometimes reinforce bitterness if that's really what you're going through. There's other psalms of disorientation that speak to a disappointed heart before God. But when things are going well, and when your head is clear, and when your heart is full, these are wonderful psalms to turn to, because you will find yourself in full agreement. You'll agree with the author, you'll agree with the saints, and you'll agree that all people everywhere ought to echo these very same things, just as the author has said. You'll agree about the character of God, you'll agree that his works are good. And you may just find that the author has expressed things in a way far better than you ever could have. So there we have just a quick overview of orientation psalms. Last week we talked about a psalm of wisdom. This week, a psalm of creation. And so next Sunday, we dive into the topic, Psalms of disorientation. What do the Psalms have on offer for us when in fact things are not going well? So until then, the challenge remains before you. Pick a psalm or 2 or 5 if you want this week, however many you want to read through. Pick ones that aren't already on the reference page. Read through them and think, where does it fit in this categorization scheme? And then email your thoughts to me, and we'll make sure that those ones are included on our page. And we'll build a map that will help us search the Psalms for exactly the right words that we want to say for God at any time. And we'll build that reference together.